Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here on the 13th of October 2022 with the next observation post weekly report. Now, without further ado, don't want to be at this all night. Number 135 on my draft ideas. Long-term disability premiums are allegedly including a Canada Pension Plan disability discount. Why? Canada Pension Plan disability is not automatic, nor is it guaranteed. Now, what I meant when I put that there is that people in the insurance industry, when asked about keeping their premiums low, they say that it's because they have built into it the Canada Pension Plan disability clawback. The problem with that is these are not compatible products. The Canada Pension Plan disability isn't any occupation insurance. It's a pension, but pensions and insurance are almost the same thing. Long-term disability, at least in the federal government plans, for example, are hybrid types of insurance, which have first a 2-year period with an own occupation period, followed by up until age 65 for if you meet the Canada Pension Plan disability definition, which is any occupation. Now, brief explanation. The own occupation disability definition is when you cannot perform your own trade. The any occupation disability definition is when you cannot perform any trade. So basically, they made a tougher definition for the Canada Pension Plan disability, but they also used a very similar definition in the Public Service Superannuation Act and the RCMP Superannuation Act. You know what doesn't have a very strict definition? The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. According to the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, disabled means you cannot perform your own trade. Now that's a big difference between the other federal plans and the Canada Pension Plan disability. What I said about long-term disability insurance companies of Canada trying to subsidize, their insurance, which, by the way, is the people who buy the premiums for the insurance. And it's usually offered by employers, not the insurance companies, at least to the best of my knowledge. Because in Canada, people didn't buy long-term disability insurance. So therefore, the employers, the companies, the governments, they stepped in and started to sell insurance to their employees. And they called it a benefit from work. Moving on to 136. Long-term disability percentage varies. Why? The Service Income Support Insurance Plan is 75%. Sun Life, I get that one currently, and I used to get SISIP, is 70%. Income Replacement Benefit is 90%. Now, I've touched on this topic before, but basically when these programs, insurances, and other schemes are set up, the people who are negotiating it, the people who are setting it up, decide on what percentage to use. So, for example, in 1997, at a Finance Committee hearing in the Hansard in the House of Commons, there was the president of the Canadian Health and Life Insurance Industry Association. He was asked a question about what percentages do insurances cover. And basically he said and for the record, I have a copy of it, you can find a copy of it, he said basically it's whatever they decide to put into the insurance policy. If you want to put 150%, you can. If you want to put 100%, you can. If you want to put 70 or 75%, you can. Now, I've also spoke about this before, but normally contracts are negotiated. They have basically consent. But in the case of the federal government plans, there is no consent. So normally, if you walked in off the street and tried to buy an insurance policy, they would offer you what's called a boilerplate type insurance policy, and you can take it or leave it. You can go away, or you can sign on the dotted line and start paying your premiums, and then you get coverage. Now, with the federal government long-term disability plans, they never negotiated that with the union for the public service, and they didn't negotiate it with the Canadian Forces members, nor the RCMP members. So somebody decided to put an arbitrary figure into these insurances. There's a small difference between the two military, paramilitary type plans because they get 75% of their old salary versus the civilian insurances, they get 70%. Now, I suspect it has something to do with the public service and the RCMP and the Canadian Forces pension plans being at maximum of 70% for the civilian side, but I'm not sure. But the thing is, what you have to remember is that the government wants to save. In our case, for the 4 federal government plans, there's the Sun Life policy that covers the unionized public servants. There's the Service Income Support Insurance Plan that covers Canadian Forces members. Then there's the RCMP plan, that's through Great West Life. And then there's the one for members of Parliament, managers, and non-unionized employees. That's with Industrial Alliance, and it's called the Public Service Management Insurance Plan. Now, all 4 of these plans, I keep saying this, hoping that'll stick into people's heads, is one principle, His Majesty the King these days. It would have been Her Majesty the Queen, but now it's going to be the Crown, as represented by now King Charles. So the government sells insurance to the people who are its employees, but they don't admit that it's the government, and they pretend that these are insurance companies providing an actual insurance product. That is not right. It's unjust, unfair, probably illegal, because you're misrepresenting yourself to your employees. You're pretending that the premiums are going to a company to provide underwriting of an insurance policy. But what really happens is the government takes the money off your check and they don't really send it anywhere, maybe. I'm not sure, but if they do send it, who are they sending it on behalf of? I don't know until someone proves to me that the money gets actually paid. As far as I know, the government just takes it off your check and that's it. Okay, point number 137. Veterans Affairs Canada's program arrangement is similar to the reimbursement agreements. Now, a quick reminder about what I'm talking about. In 2006 and updated in 2012, Veterans Affairs Canada and the Department of National Defence and Service Income Support Insurance Plan Financial Services, SISIP Financial Services, they sat down and they negotiated what they called a program arrangement. Now, under the program arrangement, there are many different items, but one item in particular, of particular significance, is the fact that they put in section 3.2.1 that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan Financial Services will be the first provider of income replacement. Now, quick point about income replacement. Income replacement is a lie. It's not income. It's not income replacement. It's actually insurance. So the Service Income Support Insurance Plan pays insurance in relation to a contract because people paid a premium, which is the contribution, which is the, trying to think of the word now. Anyway, in contracts, you had to provide money in order to, or some form of benefit to the person. Money has to change hands, right? So basically, without the money changing hands, it wouldn't be valid. But in order to get insurance, the premium is, or service is, anyway, that's escaping my mind right now. I mean, it's funny because I've said it so many times, it ought to be right off the tip of my tongue. But anyway, now, VAC's program arrangement, well, I already spoke about that. The reimbursement agreements, that's what the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, as part of its condition to actually paying the insurance, they require you to agree to pay them back if you later get things like Canadian Forces pension or the Canada Pension Plan Disability, and in the old days, the Pension Act pension. Now, they don't do the new income replacement benefit. Like Service Income Support Insurance Plan used to take the pension into account to reduce National Defence's insurance expense. But these days, they reversed course, and the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is deducted from the Veterans Affairs Income Replacement Benefit, as per Section 3.2.1 of the program arrangement. But there was no agreement with the disabled veteran to let this happen. These three entities got together and agreed to do this, but they didn't consult. They didn't poll the studio audience. They never consulted the disabled veteran. Surely that isn't right. It isn't legal. It isn't ethical. I mean, it's just nuts. Anyway, number 138, the Pensions for Life's $20,000 income exemption from clawback. Why not use the Old Age Securities exemption from clawback? Now, I touched briefly on this last week or on a similar topic. But when they were looking at, like, what should we do to allow extra money, to see what their goal is to try to make people, allow people to get used to work and get back to work, get hardened up for work, and then get off of the sucking the government tit, basically. So back when they changed the rule was, it wasn't like they had no allowable earnings. The rule was a complicated formula. It was 50% of any earnings when you're in a rehabilitation program. So if you made $100,000, it will be $50,000 will be clawed back from your SISIP. But, well, under the income replacement benefit. Now, after the rule got changed, it became $20,000, and that's it. So it could be a bad thing because the veteran could have made more than $20,000 and could have had more of an exemption if they had used the flexible formula of 50%, but they decided to make it $20,000, and I asked the Deputy Minister, General Latinchuk, why back in 2018, and he said they consulted all the provinces, and they found that $20,000 was the most generous amount that was allowed to be earned without clawback, and they decided to use that. Now, why didn't they consult with the Old Age Securities program? They allow up to $78,000 before they start clawing back anything for old age pension. Okay? So here they are trying to make themselves look good by saying we used the best one of the provincial systems. Now, I'm presuming it was provincial workers' comp, but it might also be provincial welfare. I'm not sure which one. But the governments in both the provinces and the federal government consider workers' compensation to be welfare. They consider that to be something paid out from the government, and it seems like they think that you don't pay for it. But allow me to dispel that idea, because workers' compensation is the exchange of the right to sue in tort for workers' compensation instead. That's what workers' compensation is. Now, the old Pension Act was like that. The Pension Act was an exchange of the right to sue in order to get the pension. The thing is there's a very big question these days of whether the new Veterans Charter or the Veterans Wellbeing Act, whether or not that involves the exchange of the right to sue. That's for someone to test out in legal terms, maybe, and go to court. And then if the government tried to say, hey, under the Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act, Section 9, you can't sue because you got awarded this or you got awarded that. Now, under the old rules, if someone had a Pension Act pension, you could not sue the federal government, period, for your injury. Didn't matter if it was pain and suffering or if it was economic, you could not sue the government if you had been compensated already. Now, people might know me and think that I would disagree with that, but I actually agree with that. The reason being is that in the common law, you are not allowed to get compensated to more than 100% of your loss. So if you were allowed to sue two different people and get more than what you lost, then obviously that would violate the compensation principle in the common law. But the problem here is that it's a very artificial thing in the federal government. They wrote into the law that they would deduct, for example, if you sued someone that hurt you, and you also get a pension for it. If it was somebody other than the government, they would deduct 50% of your damages. So they will convert the lump sum, because damages are always paid in a lump sum amount. They will convert that into a monthly pension act amount, and then they will reduce your pension by 50% if you're injured by a civilian. Now, if you were injured by someone in the government and you sued the government, they wrote into the law, which they totally control the writing of, that they would deduct 100% of the damages. That is absurd. It's unjust. It's immoral. I'm using the same words over and over, but it's bullshit, basically. You can't have two different rules for the same thing. You can't say that, oh, we're going to give the government a special treatment because we're the government. Well, then you're saying that some people are more equal than others. The government has to, at least in theory, abide by the same rules as everybody else. Now, long-term disability premium holiday. Too much money, which is normally a good problem to have. Now, I haven't seen it ever for the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, but I haven't reviewed all of their annual statements. But for the Public Service Management Insurance Plan and the Sun Life policy, 12,500G, every now and then they say, oh my God, we got too much money here, and we're going to declare a 1 or a 2 year holiday where nobody has to pay premiums. Now, then the employer saves 6 times as much money as the employee. The employee gets to save some money because they pay 15% of the premium. But the government gets to save 6 times as much money. And think about it, if they run into some financial difficulty down the road, wouldn't they be better off not having a holiday at all and just simply having more accrued premiums? So they want to reduce their expenses, and they say they have too much money, and then they declare that they're going to give themselves this huge break. It's crazy. But the thing is all of this stuff has so much shell game stuff, like they try to make it sound like they're doing this to help the employee, but really they're helping themselves to the tune of 6-1, 85% versus 15%. Now the thing is, that will bring up a principle in equity law called unjust enrichment. So the government gets unjustly enriched at the expense of the employee, because you know who really earns all of the premiums? The employee and or the Canadian Forces RCMP member. Even though the government might pay it to Great West Life or Manulife or Sun Life, because until they prove it, I'm not going to accept that this is what really happens. So when they pay the money, they're paying what the person earned. So they're not actually paying it on their own behalf. They're paying it, like the IBM versus Waterman case in 2013 in Supreme Court of Canada, any payment made on behalf of the employee is the employee's property. It's that simple. So the government wants to look good by having generous benefits, but every now and then people get upset about the government having generous benefits like pensions. But the thing is that ignores the fact that pensions are property. How can you say that long-term disability is a generous benefit when insurance is property? It's bought with the premiums that are earned by the sweat on people's brow. It is not something the government gives you out of the goodness of their heart. So pensions, insurance, all of these things, they're really earned by the worker. I mean, even workers' compensation. I found a report from 1987, I think, and I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, but he did it up for Ontario. And it was a really lengthy report, and I got a copy of it on my group in the files section. Either that or I have a link to it there somewhere. But basically, the workers on the workers' compensation system, they subsidize other injured workers. So healthy people, either while you're working, the employer pays the premiums into the workers' compensation system. But they then pass the cost up or down. Up means it goes up to the consumer. Down means it goes down to the employee. So in the case of the government where they don't have a product to sell and they can't pass the cost on to the consumer, then they pass it down to the employees with less pay. So basically, even workers' compensation is paid for, even though, according to the Meredith principle, the employer is supposed to pay 100% of the premium. But they pay 100%, but it's only lip service. Okay, moving on because my eyes are getting a bit blurry. Number 140, last point for tonight. At some point, new Veterans Charter will have the same cost problem as the old pension had, too much money getting spent. Now, why do I say that? Well, because when they planned to have the new Veterans Charter, they had this thing they called earnings loss benefit, which they then changed the name to the income replacement benefit. And they expected, according to a report I read on the audit reports, internal audit reports on Veterans Affairs, you can go find it yourself. They were surprised that people were staying on earnings loss benefit longer than 24 months. So people know that people that are on the Service Income Support Insurance Plan Rehabilitation Program at 24 months without fail, with some exceptions, they kick you to the curb. But Veterans Affairs didn't kick everybody to the curb at 24 months. They allowed people to stay on past 24 months. Now, that means they didn't estimate the costs for an increased number of people on the program, which was exactly the problem that they had with the pensioner. Okay? You had a lifetime payment, and you had people getting put on it, and then nobody came off it until they died. But as more and more people get on it, they stayed, so the cost increased. Well, when they brought in the new Veterans Charter, first they had the age 65 thing to reduce costs because instead of going for life, they stopped it at age 65. But then in 2015, on the 8th of July, 2015, I think it might have been the 8th of July or the 15th of July, 2015, they announced the retirement income security benefit because people complained about having no compensation after age 65. I mean, you have a lifetime injury, but you didn't have lifetime compensation. So they brought in the retirement income security benefit, and that means basically it's a for life payment. It might not be the same as the Pension Act, but it's similar. Now, so I'll give you another quick example, but I kind of think I made my point. Okay, back, I think in 2008 or maybe 12, the Parliamentary Budget Office did a report about future costs of the Afghanistan war. And they said they expected by 2019-2020 that there would be a large influx of delayed onset post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what happened in 2018? You had, instead of about 1,500 people, 1,000, 1,200 people get medically discharged. They had 2,500 people that were medically released in 2018. So the Parliamentary Budget Office was right as rain. They looked at this and they estimated it, and they were right. They looked into the crystal ball and they were right. Now, when you have more people getting put into the system, it's going to cost the system more. So is it any surprise that by 2019, after the 2018 medical release being way higher, in 2019 they decided to get rid of the career impact allowance, which used to be called the permanent impairment allowance. And in 2011, Bill C-55, they added the permanent impairment allowance supplement, and then they changed that to the career impact allowance supplement. But they decided, in a report put out in 2019 by the PBO again, the Parliamentary Budget Office, they said that, there's going to be this many veterans lose this much money, like over their life. $300,000 was the average, I think they said. And that was because the change in policy, which basically they had more people and they had the same amount of money to spend, so they decided to split it up differently. So basically what everything the government does seems to be, they decide that this is the amount of money they're going to spend. Now, how many people get it, they're going to divvy it up between those people. And they don't want people getting more than another person, and they don't want their budget going up. If you look at, for example, like I did, if you look at all the budget reports for Veterans Affairs, it's very steady. It's like a flat. It's not a chart going up. It's flat. And how do they do that? They get rid of the career impact allowance supplement. They kick people off as quick as they can. They do whatever they can to try to keep their costs down. They act just like a private company. Now the difference is private companies don't send people to war. Private companies, well, sometimes they do Blackwater and stuff, but generally speaking, defense is a national interest. And in order to attract people to defend the country, to defend the citizens of the country, you need to have good benefits. Now I use the benefit and I'm cringing inwardly, because benefits are not something that you earned and someone's going to compensate you for. If you gave someone $1 and they gave you $1 back, you didn't get any benefit. See? So if you gave the right to sue to the government in case you got injured in the military, and in respect to that, in quid pro quo, in lieu of, you got the old pension. You didn't get a benefit when you got your pension check. You got what you paid for with your right to sue. You see? So if you get the Canadian Forces pension, or the Public Service pension, or the RCMP pension, or the Canada pension plan, you don't get any benefit. You get what you paid for with your contributions. You see? If you get injured and you get the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, you don't get any benefit. You paid the premiums in case you get injured. Now, if you don't get injured, you pay your premiums your whole career and you didn't get any benefit. And that's the way the system works. That is the way insurance works. On that point, because I think I'm belaboring this, I know one sore point for many soldiers and probably other long-term employees is the fact that they pay into the employment insurance system the whole life, their whole career, and at the end, they don't get nothing back. Like some people might be in the seasonal industry or some seasonal work or something, and they might have to use the employment insurance system a lot. So those people probably get a lot of benefit from their contributions, their premiums. But the people in the RCMP and the Canadian Forces and the Public Service, they never or hardly ever get to claim employment insurance. But that's just simply the way insurance works. I'm not going to say there's something wrong with that. That you paid the insurance, and if you don't get laid off, then you got what you paid for, peace of mind, which is what every insurance is supposed to be. You'd almost think that I'm an insurance salesman. I know so much about it, whatever, but I'm not trying to sell insurance. I'm trying to explain how insurance works. Because if you ever watch that movie, The Incredibles, the insurance companies have warped things so they don't want to pay out at all on any technicality that they can come up with. I'll give you 2 examples from my own life. Left family, went down to Disney in Florida. They had a hurricane here, and when we came back, a window was blown out of the house. Now, I contacted the insurance company, and we had a glass rider on my insurance. And it was supposed to be $50 to get a new window put in. But oh no, they said this was part of the house. It's not the window, because it was a casement window, and that whole thing, which was like a whole thing, if the glass had broken, they said, we would have replaced the glass. Now that is utter bullshit, but I didn't want to fight them. I mean, insurance companies, they kind of got you wrapped around, they got all the power like the government. Even though I know they're full of shit, they got away with it. So they used a $1,000 deductible on a $2,000 window. Now I still got a $2,000 window replaced for the sake of $1,000, but it should have only cost me $50 fucking bucks. The other one was a car insurance thing. A young fellow was driving my SUV. Someone rear-ended him. It was their fault. Therefore, my vehicle got fixed at their expense. When I went to go pick it up, the people at the auto body said that'll be $1,000 or something like that. I said, excuse fucking me? I said, my son got rear-ended. Their insurance is supposed to pay all this. I'm not paying no fucking deductible. Well, you should have seen the faces on them. They had never seen someone dispute this. So they called up to their headquarters. They called this one, they called that one. They said they were going to waive it for me, and they let me go. But go fuck yourself. If someone runs into you, causes you damage, you should not have to pay a fucking cent. Right? I mean, but how many people, when the people at the auto body shop said, you know, this will be this much for your deductible, how many people would have just paid it without thinking? So that's my second example. And I think it's a good example. I wonder if there's any story to it. Because they're unjustly trying to get money out of people that shouldn't have to pay. Because I'm backlighting in my monitor for my TV for the computer I got here. But at least I hope you people see my point, because sometimes people look at me like I'm nuts. Okay? Like, if everybody thinks that something works a certain way. Like, I'll give you this analogy from my member of parliament's office. I'm talking to this receptionist, or whatever she wants to call it, Ruth, over there in the Mount Pearl office. And I'm telling her clawback shouldn't be happening. Man, everybody does it. And she thought that that was going to get me to go along with the gaslighting. I don't care if everybody does it. Everybody shouldn't be doing it. If my Canada pension plan is going to subsidize the federal government on the service income support insurance plan, and it's going to subsidize the Sun Life insurance that I have from my public service, and it's going to subsidize my public service pension, and it's going to subsidize my reserve force pension plan. So I get $1,000 a month from Canada Pension Plan Disability, and then I lost $2,560 a month. Now, because I got $1,000 to the good, I'm down $1,560 a fucking month. Now, she looked at me and said that they all do it, so I should be happy with that. But they've been doing that since 2015. That's 7 years that they have been doing that. Now, my SISIP got cut off, so they don't do it no more. But if I did get approved again, because I asked my member of parliament to try to help me get that settled away and fixed up again, because I shouldn't have been kicked off it, they would go ahead and take the Canada Pension Plan Disability into account again. That is absurd. Remember I said that His Majesty the King thing? Well, His Majesty the King shouldn't be taking $1,000 off my Sun Life policy. And then he shouldn't be taking off my SISIP policy if I get reinstated. And then they shouldn't take $500 a month off of my public service pension under the bridging. And then they shouldn't be taking $50 a month off my reserve force pension plan. Because they ought to be talking to each other and realizing that they're taking off more than I fucking got in Canada Pension Plan Disability. So this is absurd. Nobody should have to do this. In fact, the Canadian Health and Life Insurance Industry Association, they have a policy to avoid this, and they look at how much you're awarded, and they divide it up between whoever, by whatever. I think it's supposed to be 50-50. I would have a problem with that. Why should it be 50-50, say, between Sun Life and Manulife? I was in the public service for 21 years. I was in the military for 13. So, should they divide it up by how many years I was at each organization? Like, my public service insurance covered much bigger salary, even though there was a smaller amount. So, should Sun Life get to claw back 2/3 of the amount, and SISIP only be allowed to claw back 1/3? Now, then bring in the public service pension and the reserve force pension plan. Why should anybody have to have those being taken into account too? Because then you have all these complicated interactions that they could have avoided by not doing it in the first place. See, all of these things should act as a silo. If you get the Canadian Forces pension, that's a silo, and nobody else touches it, and it don't touch anything else. If you get the public service pension, the same thing. RCMP pension, the same thing. Canada Pension Plan Disability, it's a silo. You're not supposed to have it deduct some other pension, and some other pension is not supposed to deduct it. It's a simple concept. All these people are getting away with highway robbery. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.